So that's my story, and I think we can get started.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you'd please get us to the next slide, Neil. Oh, and also Neil is here. He's our tech support. Thanks, Neil. Okay, so to begin, I do want to acknowledge that we are organizing, living, and resisting on the stolen, unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. We recognize that the settler colony of British Columbia was created using forms of strategic violence and dispossession, which has structured our society and created lasting injustices that persist today. We also recognize that the displacement and gentrification that are experienced by many in so-called British Columbia are part of the larger colonial and capitalist systems that occupy these lands, and that Indigenous sovereignty and land back must be at the heart of our fight for housing for all. Okay, awesome. So if we go to the next slide, we have a very quick overview of kind of like what we're going to be learning today. So this workshop kind of covers like some of the common issues that renters have with landlords and what are your rights under BC tenancy laws. Most of what we're discussing is going to be covered in the handbooks that we're dropping in chat. So let me just very quickly open chat right now. And so here's the link to the handbook. It's an ugly link. You'll have to bear with me. But you can check it out, and everything that we're going to be covering is going to be on there. So if you ever need a refresher, check it out. It's also important to mention that we are going to close this presentation by encouraging everyone to think about how these problems that we face as tenants connect to the kind of broader struggles that many others face, Indigenous struggles, homeless struggles. We think that this is kind of a good opportunity to slightly reframe how we might think about housing and things like rent and landlords. We don't think housing should be a commodity or something that people speculate and make money on, but instead should be free for everyone. And we want to encourage everyone to think about a world where this is just something that exists, right? This is how that might look like. Another thing we'll be looking at is where the laws fall short and some basic strategies that we are able to kind of like stand up to our rights for. And what the VTU is doing to meet some of these gaps that like laws don't cover. So to be completely clear to you, this workshop definitely is not an exhaustive list of your rights in every situation, like we'll be here forever. It also just does not go into eviction situations generally. That will be covered by our eviction self-defense workshops. That's going to be happening next week. We can connect you to people who could help you, but we're not lawyers, we're not advocates. We're just kind of two renters interested in building collective tenant power and fighting for the city at the way that we know how. We can touch on situations where you might need to take your landlord to the residential tenancy branch or the RTB to resolve a dispute. But the kind of like legal fighting is not exactly kind of what the VTU is prepared for. If you want a more in-depth understanding or more help on the legal side, we're also going to be linking the TRAC, the TRAC, or the Tenant Resource and Advocacy Center website. Let me just pull up the where is it? Give me 1 second, folks. Okay, here we go. So if you have any legal issues against your tenant that like really needs to be solved, check out the website I just linked as well. They will give free counseling and advertise or and advising on tenants issues on the legal side. Okay, so going to the next slide. We should probably start with, why do we learn our rights in the first place? What's the point of that? Well, first of all, we should never assume that landlords are playing by the rules. I know a lot of people who've been completely screwed over by landlords because they don't know the laws, and it shouldn't be that way. We really shouldn't have to like know laws for them to be followed, but that's kind of like where we're at. So it's very hard, but knowing your rights means you know if and when they're being violated, and knowing when we could uphold it and when we could like fight against any kind of like violations that we have. It's also very useful to kind of like talk to people, even if you're not a renter. We could talk to people who like are renters, and we could help our family, our friends, our neighbors. And what I think is most important, we can know where the law falls short and what we could do as a collective to change it. So going to the next slides, we have to ask also the question of where do renters' rights actually come from? So if we look at it from kind of a legal perspective, most of these rights are spelled out in laws within the BC Residential Tenancy Act. This is the responsibility of the provincial government. All of the disputes are resolved at the Residential Tenancy Branch, or the RTB. And we'll kind of go over kind of like the process of the RTB, like pros and cons a lot later. But these laws also do not cover all renting situations. So if you share your home with your landlord, if you rent from a roommate in a sublet arrangement, if you live in the dorms in the UBC, I know the endowment land has some like funky rules. Like some of your rights will be covered in these situations, but not all of them. So it's just like probably pretty important to note. So that is one answer to the question of like, where do rights come from? Kind of like in the legal sense, it's kind of like top down. But another way to think about our rights is from the bottom up. So over the decades, there's a lot of organized groups of renters, such as the VTU that we are today. We've fought for the laws that we have today. So when we think about rights as coming from the bottom up, we can think about like how we could build power to win the changes we need to strengthen our rights, or sometimes to protect what we already have from being like taken away. So rights that we think have existed forever are actually earned. And a lot of the rights that we'll talk about today are like earned. So if you look at the photo on the left there, that's a tenants org in Vancouver in 1968. And they were actually really radical. So at the time, the city was doing kind of like, a lot of places had like 10% rent increases, which is like, when you look back, that's insane. 10% of my rent is like $100, or a lot more than $100. And because of that, it led to them running a 5-month rent strike covering like 200 people. And eventually they kind of wrote a petition towards the city with 25,000 signatures. And these kind of like actions done by this like original tenants org won so many rights that we have today. They won the right that rent increases can only happen once a year. They won the right for voters to, like, for renters to vote in municipal elections. Renters did not have that right. You had to be a property owner originally to vote in municipal elections. That was through organizing. You can't be evicted arbitrarily anymore. That's another right there. So it is through these actions that a lot of the laws that kind of like protect us today kind of actually happen. And so we're kind of standing on the shoulders of giants here. But you know, it's just important to note that they don't give us these rights. We won these rights. And the rights that we'll be discussing today is not set in stone. And we as landlords, we as tenants can come together to keep our landlord in check. Okay, so now starting to talk about the rights. Rebecca, if you'd please take over.
All right, thanks for that wonderful intro. So we're going to talk about common tricks and loopholes, such as rent control. Next slide, please. So in BC, your landlord can only raise the rent once every 12 months during your tenancy. Thanks to the freeze on that, anyone who moved in kind of prior to the pandemic is now kind of on the cycle where we all get our rent increases probably a couple of weeks ago. And so I'm sure a lot of us are preparing for a jump in January or February, or if your landlord did this incorrectly. Rents can only be raised by the amount set by the provincial government each year. The current formula is set to the rate of inflation, which is usually 1 to 3%. For this year, we are grudgingly grateful for the fact that it is only 2%. Last year, it was 2.5%. When serving this, your landlord has to use the proper legal form, which is pictured. They have to fill it out fully and properly. And they have to give you at least 3 full months notice ahead of the rent increase. That means they can't give you a notice right now and expect to have that increase in place for January. The next possible time they can raise it is for February, and so on and so forth. You can see the current allowable increase at that link. And one thing I just wanted to mention before we move ahead is that they can't round up. They can't just decide, oh, I think it's going to be $25 if your rent is not high enough for it to for that to be appropriate. So too bad. If they like round numbers, it has to be either the exact amount or slightly less. Okay, next slide. So fixed term leases used to be a big loophole that they were using that has finally been plugged. At the end of a lease term, your tenancy agreement automatically goes month to month with the same conditions as previous agreement. You don't have to sign a new lease with higher rent or different conditions, and you do not have to move out or sign a mutual agreement to end tenancy. Pretty much that old loophole was that they could say that you had to move out at the end of a year or 6 months or whatever. And then they'd be like, oh, you want to stay? Well, here's a new lease. They can't do that anymore. Next slide, please. For extra fees, those have limits and are in some cases outright illegal. Late rent, yes, they can charge a fee on that, but only if it's written in your tenancy agreement and the maximum charge is $25. For insufficient funds charges, that mostly covers people who still write checks, which I know some people do. That used to be the only reason I had a checkbook, but only if it's written into your tenancy agreement. And again, the maximum is $25. For key and fob replacement, yes, they can charge a fee for that, but only the cost of the replacement. They can't tack on extra. For moving fees into another suite in the building, yes, they can, but moving into a different suite in the building is considered entering a new tenancy, so your rent may be increased, so watch out for that. The maximum was 15 on that. They can if it's a strata building, like if you're renting from someone who owns a condo, they can pass on the charges that strata charges them to move in, because sometimes there's usually like $100 elevator fee for things like that. Okay, move on. It is absolutely 100% not legal to have an application fee. I know some landlords are trying it this time around. No, absolutely not. For changing locks when you move in, some people like to do this just for peace of mind. They cannot charge you for that, and you have the right to request that. For guest fees, no, not unless your guest becomes a roommate, and then that runs into stickier territory, which I'm not going to cover. For parking or storage, yes, but only written in your tenancy agreement, and if so, it cannot be increased annually or ever, because why would the charges on that go up? So when you move out, your landlord is not entitled to keep your deposit. Once your tenancy is over, your landlord has 15 days from the day you provide them with your forwarding address in writing to either apply to the RTB to keep all or part of your deposit, get your written permission to let them keep all or part of it, or return your deposit. And I see this is not the modified version. So one thing you absolutely have to do is be there for the move out inspection. If the landlord has to give you 2 chances to do this, you personally do not have to be there. You can assign someone in your stead to do this, but someone has to be there. Otherwise you could forfeit your entire deposit. And the other thing is, if they do not do these things, if they do not apply to the RTB to keep your deposit or get your permission, you may be entitled to double your deposit back. You'll have to apply to the RTB to get it, but it's possible, and that's a great incentive for everyone to, get it together. Next, please. The biggest loophole in rent control is between tenancies. That means they can raise them however much they want in between tenants. We've all seen this time after time. It used to, we just looking through common rentals, you can see that they have jumped quite a bit for if you have to move. VTU, along with a lot of other organizations, have been petitioning around this, and we have our petition, but if you've signed any of them, that's great. I encourage you to do so. This is kind of referred to as vacancy control, and the city of Vancouver did try to put it in place for SROs only, and they've been taken to court where they are fighting back. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Next slide, please. Oh, and I'll pass it back to Mel.
Sorry. Yeah, okay. So also we'll kind of probably cover questions around the end of the, I completely forgot to mention. We'll probably cover questions at the end of the, what's it called, of the workshop. So if you could hold your questions like till the very end, where we could kind of like have more time to kind of go through everything. But yeah, okay. So repairs and maintenance. I have heard so many people have issues with repairs over the course of me being in the VTU. I like a lot of people that I know have issues with repairs, so this is kind of like a major issue. But if you go to the next slide, please. Okay, so here's a list of kind of like all the things that your landlord's responsible to maintain. So, and a common issue is that landlords will either ignore or deflect requests to get something repaired. Sometimes they'll even try to tell you that it's your responsibility to fix these issues and it's not the landlord's. That is completely not true. And it's actually funny because before I joined the VTU, there was a point where like my place had like no hot water in the kitchen whatsoever. And I had to like go to the bathroom. If I needed hot water, I had to like take from the shower. And it was like, and the landlord told me that he'll get it fixed the next week, and he didn't. And he said the same thing after, and this kind of went on for like 3 months before it finally actually got fixed. So, you know, this is personal for me. But a lot of people also have issues of like their stuff never getting repaired, and that's like actually a breaker that breaks your rights. The vast majority of maintenance and repair issues that are your landlord's responsibility. This is something that another thing that the tenants org won in 1968. And most cities also have standards of maintenance bylaws where like minimum maintenance of buildings is enforced through fines. So you can contact your city government to enforce issues like garbage, pests, unsafe structures, fire safety, et cetera, you could contact your city to kind of like get them fixed. I think the next slide is just more of stuff that your landlord has to do. Oh no, this is stuff that you have to do. And these are kind of like the exceptions for what was mentioned earlier, but most of the stuff are your landlord's responsibility. All of this is in the handbook as well if you need to like look through it. And if we go to the next slide, we're talking about now emergency repairs. So you never have to wait to deal with emergency repairs. If your landlord's not responding in a reasonable amount of time, usually this means that they haven't responded to like 2 phone calls. You have the right to cover the cost of repair and ask your landlord to pay you back. You got to keep your receipts and document what exactly happened in writing. But absolutely get stuff fixed. If you cannot afford the repairs, you could go to the RTB and apply for dispute resolution to request an emergency repair order. The RTB considers emergency repairs a top priority when scheduling hearings. However, I know that recently the wait time gets like pretty bad. There's like a 4 weeks wait time to deal with emergency repairs in the RTB, which is kind of insane. But also kind of like another part where the law kind of like doesn't really protect you all that much. But, you know, just threatening your landlord about the RTB, like just saying, hey, you got to get this fixed or I'll bring this up in the RTB. That should be enough to get your landlord into action. So just, you know, just some technicalities of this. And then Rebecca, if you cover this part as well.
Yes, let's go over peace and quiet enjoyment. So, next slide, please. So, what does that mean? As part of that, your landlord cannot just show up unannounced. They have to give you at least 24 hours written notice, which must state the date, the time, which also has to be reasonable, between 8 a.m. and 9 p.m., and a reasonable reason for entry, such as making repairs or showing your suite to a prospective tenant, or even like a reasonable inspection, yearly, quarterly, that kind of thing. The exception to the 24-hour notice and the written notice is if it's for emergency repairs, and that can happen. Next, please. Behavior you don't have to put up with. Unreasonable and ongoing noise. That means within the building itself, if you, like me, live near the P&E and you get free concerts during the summer, there's nothing, you know, your landlord or the RTB can do about that. That goes to the city. Unreasonable and ongoing secondhand smoke, that you can complain to your landlord about that. Or honestly, in this case, if this is a good time to make friends, hopefully, and you know, hopefully you can work it out yourselves. You don't have to put up with intimidation or harassment. Hopefully that goes without saying. A landlord entering your rental unit too frequently. That can be a little nebulous. And in fact, if you think that your landlord is coming in too frequently, perhaps as an intimidation tactic, you can go to the RTB to get them to stop that. You do not have to put up with your landlord entering your rental unit without permission or proper notice, except of course for emergency repairs. And the landlord cannot unreasonably refuse you access to common areas of the building. If it's a house, I think they have more leeway, like they can say the yard is for landlord use only. But if you're in a purpose-built building, rental building, like they can't stop you from using the laundry room or things like that. Next, please. It is possible to break a lease without paying, thanks to Vancouver's rental market. If you leave and the place is rentable with just a little bit of cleaning, your landlord can probably turn around and rent it the same week if they really want to. A lot of times, well, okay. If you've given your notice, your landlord must try to re-rent your unit at a fair price, and they have to prove that they tried before they can ask you to pay a penalty fee. That means if your current rent is, let's say, $1,750, they can't list it for $3,000 and be like, oh, no one wants to rent this now, so you owe me for the rest of it. You are always allowed to break a lease if you're fleeing family violence or moving out or moving into a long-term care facility. For some of this, if you want to meet your landlord halfway, you can offer to sublet your suite for the remainder of the time. You would probably not have a lot of trouble doing that either. Next slide. Roommates may not be protected by the law. If you or one of your roommates moved into a shared house but did not sign a tenancy agreement, you are likely not protected by the tenancy laws at all. It's in your best interest to ask your landlord to update a tenancy agreement to add new roommates if possible. This can sometimes be tricky though. In BC, a tenancy agreement can only be changed with mutual consent from the landlord and the tenant. So your landlord might want to make you all sign a new agreement so they can raise the rent. You don't have to agree to this, but it might lead to a stalemate where you're prevented from adding your roommate. The weakness of these laws caused thousands of renters who are roommates to be forced to live without proper protections in exchange for affordable rents. In Quebec, landlords are required to allow lease transfers, something I wish we had here because it would make life a lot easier for a lot of people. Next, please.
Okay, so we've seen all of these kind of issues that landlords have, and a lot of these like loopholes landlords exploit the heck out of, right? So we've talked about all these rights, and we've also covered the parts of the law that doesn't really protect us enough, or doesn't really protect us from landlords who do try to trick us or let us live in all these horrible living conditions. So if the law is supposed to protect us, why do these things happen all the time? Go to the next slide. Okay, we talked before about how our rights are kind of top down versus kind of like rights won from the bottom up. We have two ways to protect ourselves against landlords, right? Individually or as a collective. As an individual, we could protect ourselves through the Tenancy Act, which functions like contract law, and the RTB, the Residential Tenancy Branch, is kind of set up to deal with all of the individual contract disputes between landlords and tenants. But we could also uphold and strengthen our rights from the bottom up through collective power. So first, let's cover the individual side of things. Next slide, please. So here are some strategies that you could keep your landlord in check that is going to like help you defend yourself legally. So the first thing, get things in writing. So emails or letters are kind of best. Screenshots of text messages can kind of serve as evidence sometimes. Just remember that neither you or your landlord can use a text message for documents that must be served formally. So like stuff like rent increase, for example. If your landlord tries to text you about a rent increase, that's not binding, right? That they have to use a sheet. For serious issues, a lot of advocates kind of recommend registered mail, so you could prove that your landlord received your correspondence. And if you and your landlord has a verbal confirmation, send a follow-up email soon after to confirm what they said. So if your landlord came up to you and was like, oh yeah, I'll get this fixed by like in a couple of days, you want to send an email to your landlord or a text asking your landlord, hey, I remember you said this, is this correct? Can I confirm this? And so that you have actually proof when shit hits the fan. The next thing you could do is keeping a tenant log. So more or less means that you're documenting kind of every interaction that you have from the start of your tenancy, just kind of like every single conversation that you had with your landlord, every kind of like what your landlord said during a rent increase, just keep track of that stuff. Because like when something bad does happen, you could kind of look back at kind of like your log and see, oh, this is a reoccurring issue, right? This is also really useful for self-defense against evictions because, sometimes a relationship can start out like really good with your landlord, can just turn out bad. Next is to gather evidence of issues as they come up. So this is especially important, like if you just moved in and you see, for example, a broken tile or something, take a picture. If you see like kind of like a hole in the wall, take a picture. All that stuff. And just make sure that you have evidence of everything. If your issue does become an issue with the RTB, you would need all of this evidence. Like all of this. Advocates will kind of tell you that like winning a dispute is 90% evidence and 10% story. So if you have everything to back up your words, you're probably going to be fine. This is kind of important too. One thing that a lot of tenants wonder about is kind of like withholding rent as a tactic to pressure landlords to follow the law. So this could be a good strategy, but not as an individual. As an individual, this is a really easy way to get you evicted. I will talk about what we can do as a collective much later, but if you're doing this all alone, don't do it. And finally, you could talk to free legal advocates like TRAC, the Tenant Resource Advocacy Center. I sent the link a lot further up. But they have a tenant info line, which you can call in most weekdays, and that should be able to help you inform what you could or could not do. So while we talk a lot about like individual powers, there are kind of like some pros and cons towards kind of like fight against landlords on your own. If you'd please go to the next slide. So we've mentioned the RTB, the Residential Tenancy Branch, like a lot. The primary way to resolve disputes with your landlord is through file through the RTB, which brings in an arbitrator who will kind of make a decision about the dispute and order a remedy. but the RTB usually offers very little representation for tenants, and their decisions tend to favor landlords. So if you have to go through arbitration to get something fixed, like it's really hard to kind of like, the balance of power is very different because they have all the money and they have all of the all of the power. And even when you do win against your landlord, even when landlords do lose at arbitration, they carry on to behave badly or continue to serve repeat evictions. So it's very hard to keep your landlord in check just with the RTB. It costs $100 to apply to a resolution, which sometimes it can be waived. But for a lot of us, I don't have $100 lying around. Like I cannot drop $100 to deal with something. So this is just like a major barrier with the RTB. And landlords can just also afford more expensive lawyers, which a lot of tenants, like I don't know any lawyers, right? And these landlords, these like big kind of like corporations, they have all the money to throw at this problem. So it's just like, all in all, the RTB is like tiring. It costs a lot of money and it's difficult. It does not mean that this isn't a way to solve your problems, but it's not viable for a lot of us, me included. So what are our alternatives? If we go to the next slide, collective power, right? So what is collective power? So this means kind of like working with your neighbors to keep your landlord in check. So, talk to your neighbors, get to know your neighbors, see if you have the same problems. I was actually just at this building, and some people from the bottom floor, it turns out that like underneath the building is an asbestos problem. There's an asbestos problem underneath the building, but the signs that are like around there, only the people on the first floor know about. So like all the people on the first floor know that there's an asbestos problem, and asbestos is pretty like serious, right? But everyone else doesn't. This is 3-floor building. And so it's only until they kind of started talking to each other that they were like, oh my God, we have asbestos underneath us right now, right? And that's kind of like, that's an issue. And so it's always important to kind of like know your neighbors and start talking about like what issues you face. Maybe you might face the same issues. You could share what you know. You start talking to your neighbors, even if it doesn't seem like you vibe, even if you might not feel like you're going to be friends, it's important to get to know the situation. And talk about what you know about your situation. Talk about like, issues that the landlord has had, if your landlord has evicted people before. And eventually, like these conversations, once you start talking to each other, a lot of times you make a building group chat, and that usually just gets things happening. If like you see your landlord screwing someone over, the group chat kind of goes like really hard. And so once you have something like this, once you've created kind of collective power, you're able to kind of like take collective action together. So like talking about like withholding rent earlier, like if one person complains to a landlord's probably just gonna like try to evict them, try to like brick wall them, make sure they can't do anything. But if like 30 people all in a building are saying, hey, so this asbestos thing, hey, this like construction noise thing, hey, all of these things, this is a problem for all of us. It's so hard for landlords to ignore this. So just get the news out, complain, share information, and hopefully you could join or start a tenants union to kind of like resolve against tenants together, or against landlords together. So next slide. Okay, so like organized landlords want to abolish rent control so they could raise the rent whenever they want and make a profit. So this is a key issue, and that's the only way we could fight that is through tenant power. Like landlords are organized, we need to be organized too. So in 2018, the VTU members and other groups organized and pressured provincial governments to change the allowable maximum rent increase in, and before that, the government formula allowed landlords to increase rents every year by the rate of inflation plus 2%. And it's only through protests and media attention that the government sped up their planned review of renter laws and changed the rent control formula. So within a month of the rally, like in the picture, the government announced that they will finally change the rent increase calculation to be set at the rate of inflation only. So if this didn't happen, if this didn't succeed, the maximum allowable rent increase this year would have been 4%. But because this happened, it went down to 2%. And that's only through collective action. Okay, so next slide. So while most repairs are landlord's responsibility, the laws do not force them to act when one tenant complains. So if a landlord's being negligent about repairs, they are likely treating your neighbors the same way. So if you make demands together to get something fixed, that's going to be a lot more effective than doing it individually. So again, at the picture in 2019, the tenants at Solheim Place started to organize after the elevator has stopped working for 6 months. This building was home to a lot of low-income seniors, and a lot of people spoke very different languages. And you know, if an elevator is like off, these people had to like walk up like 3, 4, 5 flights of stairs to get to like their home. You know, that doesn't that's not viable. And I heard 2 people died just from like not being able to kind of like go up and down. And so the landlord said that it might take months to repair, but obviously that's not a livable situation, right? So the tenants had a rally. They shamed the landlord in the media. And in a few weeks from this rally pictured, elevator was completely fixed, right? So again, like I brought these 2 examples up just to say that collective action works. Tenants together are strong. We can advocate on behalf of ourselves and will be very, very hard to ignore. So this is part of the reason why that we think events like this are so important, and bringing groups of people with common interests together in one room and just kind of like talking about your issues is so important. Okay, so let's get to the final slide. So fundamentally, we're talking a lot about these individual rights and focusing on legal stuff in this specific workshop, because we want people to be equipped when they have to deal with these hostile situations, when they have to deal with like messed up repairs, when they have to deal with like, you know, all of this like messed up stuff. But it's also important to remember that the struggles and the real goals we have are at the heart of tenants organizing specifically. So we're fighting at the neighborhood level, we're fighting at the city level, and we're fighting at the building level. They're all connected in one thing. When your landlord treats rental housing as a commodity, they're incentivized to maximize their profit at your expense. So most of the time, this involves doing all of the little loopholes that we talked about, just like lying about rights or hoping that, you know, your tenants don't know about these rights and just kind of like pushing tenants together. And so the VTU, again, fundamentally rejects that housing should be a profit-driven industry. Just like education or healthcare, housing is a human right. The best way to kind of like fight back against all of these issues is joining a tenants union. I'm biased, join the Vancouver Tenants Union. We have barbecues. But also, if you're kind of not in any of these tenant unions covered here, like if you're not in Vancouver, Victoria, or New West, Rent Strike Bargain is a campaign that's fighting to get kind of like collective agreements with rent. And they're also covering kind of like building up new tenant unions in other places, in Burnaby, and kind of like, I think there was something in Richmond, but you know, you could contact the RSB. And obviously, if you want to contact us, if you want to join the what's it called? If you want to join the VTU, I've got a link right here. So you could click it. It says something about organizing your building, you don't necessarily need to organize your building to join. This is just a good way to kind of like channel people in. So if you'd like to join the VTU, if you're energized, if you want to do something about like all of the issues that we've had to face, click the link and check us out. But yeah, that's the workshop, y'all. Thanks for coming. Yeah, and as well as the track website for sure. So I think we could absolutely stop the recording right here and we could go to questions. If anyone has any questions,